listeners. Hope everything is well. I've got a great guest today, a fellow ball-headed warrior brother and fellow Marine, Mr. Alundas Havens. Devil Dog, how we doing?
Good, brother, and thank you for mentioning that. Bald people stick together.
That's right. I tell people we're not bald, we're shaved. I read somewhere once that when you have thinning hair and you try to, hold on to it, you look weak. But if you go ahead and be decisive and bold and shave it, then obviously that makes a better leader and a better warrior.
Yes,
Um,
sir. The
well, hey,
Marine
we're
in
gonna
me was coming out.
we're going to get into your story here in just a second. Alundis is one of the few Marines that actually can do math and is actually smart. Unlike me, I was a trigger puller. He actually not only did avionics and aviation repair, but he worked on the Osprey, which is a pretty freaking amazing craft. And consider the thing can still barely fly. His job of keeping it up in the air was certainly a challenge all the time. But just like myself and the fellow warrior entrepreneurs that are out there, he decided that his time for service wasn't going to end when he hung up his uniform. And this badass started Alpha Influence Media, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that. So, Lindis, welcome to the podcast, and so great to have you here.
Thank you, brother. It's been an honor. And in my case, all this stuff started prior to the Marine Corps. So I actually come from a long lineage of, warriors who were in service. So that was one thing I loved about your book was talking about that. But fun fact, my grandfather was actually a POW, World War II.
Wow.
So he passed away when I was young, but I was 7 years old. I remember those memories with him, and he was a crazy guy. Loved watching RoboCop and the original Midway movies and stuff like that. So to me, it was something like my dad was a Marine. Unfortunately, he didn't make it through boot camp. So it was that chip on my shoulders, like, I can do it. I'm the badass, So for me, that was it. My Marine Corps story is a little bit different than a lot of people because I got in and it was just on the go. Went to.
So let's back up for a second. Talk to me about growing up. Talk to me about when you first realized you wanted to become a warrior and specifically a Marine. Give me a little bit of your background.
So originally I'm from Fresno, California. My parents were young and dumb when they had me. They were 21, 19, still partying. So I've seen a lot of things that a young kid shouldn't. And my parents treated me like an adult from 5 years old. So it was kind of like, take care of yourself, being independent. So the way that my brain processed things in trauma was I just, hyper focused, hyper fixated on some things. And I was always searching for those answers. Like, why is this? Questioning everything, Also had a stepdad in the mix that was Army. But he had these crazy views and I just didn't believe him. What's actually funny is growing up and everything, like I seen everybody in the military and I'm like, oh, my dad didn't make it. So that was one thing with me is he would talk about the Marine Corps, but I would check him on his story and it just didn't sound right. Like he said he was driving amphibs and he didn't have a license going into the Marine Corps. And I'm like, well, I know that's not true. So for me, young age knew that, ended up getting kicked out of my house at 18. Was kind of jumping off my friends' couches and trying to do that. What's funny is I got in a fight with my stepdad, kicks me out. I call the recruiter. I'm like, hey, brother, I need to be able to leave, ship out 3 months early. I chose to be a Marine, obviously, because of my dad. And then from there, I was like, you know what? I don't want to go to the Air Force. My ASVAB score was actually too low, a 52. So when I went to the Navy, it was like the recruiter was out of shape. And he was just looking at me and he's like, you got to get your scores up to be a corpsman. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do this. The Army recruiter comes, doesn't look good in uniform. And then here comes the Marine Corps recruiter seeing me fit, I'm wrestling year round then. And he's like, hey man, do you want to come work out with us? And I killed the workout. This is easy, So for me, Marine Corps was destined and it kind of solves it as well with me as a person because I always try to be the best that I can be, but I make sure I find all the education there. So that was a little bit of how I started, shipped out 3 months early, got $1,000 bonus for doing that. And what's funny is before I got in the Marine Corps, I was actually kicking it with a recruiter all day long for about a month and a half and making him do sales calls with him. And he's teaching me because I was like, I don't want to be home. If I be home, bad things are going to happen. So the Marine Corps was my savior in getting me out of my situation. And even when I got in the Marine Corps on boot leave, I had a traumatic experience as well.
Well, we'll get into that in a second, but first of all, thank you for sharing that about your family. I think you exemplify the warrior spirit, and that is someone that has hardship and challenge. Now, you could be the opposite of what you became. You could have said, hey, I had this childhood trauma. I didn't have mom and dad that loved me. I had a bad abusive stepdad, and end up spending the rest of your life feeling sorry for yourself and dealing with those. Or you can allow that iron to sharpen iron. And that's what you did. You said, you know what, this is not going to define me. This is not only not going to hurt me, but it's going to make me stronger. I know there's something big. And by the way, if I can survive a childhood like that, I can survive anything. So that
Absolutely,
is the
brother.
true warrior's journey, is you crave that adventure, you want something different, and as the harder things were growing up, the better that prepared you. So go
Absolutely.
through boot camp. What was boot camp like for you?
So what's funny is I actually okay. So the only real problem I had in boot camp is I have two left feet, so I can't drill worth shit, but I can do 30 pull-ups. So I actually my senior drill instructor was the same, or excuse me, the chief drill instructor was the same MOS as me. So dude was intimidating. It's funny as I did 35 pull-ups, and then when I seen him in the fleet later on, it was a little funny story. But for me, I was used to the yelling because I lived in that household. So my dad would be yelling. The only thing that ever really got to me is like they knew I couldn't drill. So I was getting IT'd every single day,
Tell everybody
but
what IT means.
what is it? Incentive training.
Yeah, tell them what it is,
So,
though.
so basically what it is they'll pull you to the side, you go do jumping jacks, you do high knees, you rotate. And what they do and why it's so effective is you're doing this one workout, you're doing crunches, you're doing high knees, jumping jacks, and then they move on to the next thing. So right when you're getting a little bit comfortable, it's on to the next thing. You're like, man. So for me, it was all day long because they could pull you at any time. And for me, they would say A team assemble, and that was all of us who were the bad ones, because I couldn't drill. So I'd be the one running over. I'm like, oh, and I'm getting extra training. Good thing is I was in the best shape of my life, but it was something for me that honestly I loved it because it was just pushing me. I didn't like first thing in the morning when you're building your rack because my roommate was slow. They would pull me every single morning, so that was the frustrating part. Was like that challenge, and then I couldn't drill. So it was like I did everything right, but I could not drill. So I was always getting picked on, and that was one of my big falters and adversity I had to overcome.
Brother, I'm right there with you. So we didn't call it the A team, but basically, I laughed so much and was constantly always getting in trouble that anytime someone else got IT'd, I had to go join them. And they said, Green, we know that you did something we didn't see behind our back, so we're just going to have you go ahead and IT with everybody else. So I hear you. All right,
Sounds
so you make
accurate.
it through boot camp. Tell me what that was like when you got your EGA.
So what's kind of funny about that is actually I have one of my drill instructors that gave me the EGA. Me and him are friends on Facebook. And what was funny is he was kind of like his personality was like gangsterish, bald head, fit that role. So he would always mess with me, and he's like, "Oh, you're from Fresno, that's the hood," and like make these little jokes. So when I got the EGA, he gave it to me in my hand, and he's like, "Keep this near and dear to your heart." He's like, "You're a Marine for life. You're a brother." He's like, "You made it, man." And like that made me ball up in tears because when we're going through the crucible, and we talked about this on my podcast. I had to go through 3 different guys when we were doing body sparring, and they gave me an easy guy that they made me go at, a second guy, then they got the 6'5", 275-pound guy in there, and challenged me. So for me, it was like this guy knew me well because it was kind of looking in the mirror for him. But it was one of those where it's like when I did it, I made it, and I'd say like the biggest portion of boot camp for me was just like seeing everybody else suffer, and then there goes me, smiling because I knew it was a mental game. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'm good. This is lightweight. Let's keep going. And they're like, what do you mean? Everybody hates log PT. I'm like, I love log PT. Or for me, it was like, I couldn't jump over some of the big logs, but I can climb ropes like crazy. And they're like, why could you do that? I'm like, oh, I wrestled. So I did that year round. Like climbing ropes is easy compared to a lot of people who struggle at that. So for me, it was like the mind games was easy for me. Don't get me wrong. There was those couple times like make a map and you're holding the 2 rifles in your arms and your arms hurting, and people decided to drop the rifles. So I had 6 rifles and I'm holding it and I'm like this, and they're making me know, and I'm shaking. And then I turn my head and there's like 6 drill instructors and I get hit in the head by the rifles and they're just screaming. And then it was the time where like I just couldn't think because at that time it's just absolute chaos. So I love that memory, of accomplishing that because it showed so much. But then, getting that EGA was probably one of the greatest feelings I ever had because it was like, man, I did it, put in the work, and now it's time to do it.
So you alluded to something happened after on your boot leave. What happened there, if you don't mind sharing?
Yes, sir. So I went home. My parents actually, my mom, my stepdad actually split up while I was in boot camp, and they lied to me on boot leave. They said they were back together, and I already knew because I got kicked out prior to, and part of it was my stepdad treating my mom like crap. So I'd be like getting in his face. Why is that? My dad's abusive, So for me, it's like my stepdad was scrawny compared to my dad. So I didn't care, you know, I'm like, I can take him on. I fight my dad and he's 5'11", 250 at the time. So my stepdad's like a buck 75. I'm like, I weigh more than you. So what happened, I believe, is we threw a party. From there, I bought him alcohol that day, and I just kind of noticed the vibe was off. He was sticking on his own in the garage. My wrestling coach was there, and he kind of was the father figure for me, you know, would be there all the time and so forth, and talk to my mom about, hey, how do we help this kid? They would see me getting in shouting matches with my biological dad at tournaments. So it was something that like clearly affected me. So that's how the relationship started. Coach comes up to me that day. He says, hey, I'm going to use the bathroom. The only bathroom that was open was in my mom's room, which is already a red flag. So I look at him and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. My mom's in the bathroom, so just wait till she gets out. So he walks towards the room, corner of my eye, I see my stepdad right there. My stepdad follows into the room, cocks back a 45, and misses shooting him in the face by a centimeter. So that was something for me that was huge. And then cops come, you know, try to arrest me. SWAT team goes through the house. They get my brother and sister out. And then I'm walking by and my stepdad's saying he's racist. So he was saying things and he's like, that guy was Mexican. I didn't know if he had a gun. And I wanted to flip, you know, and from there I wanted revenge because it's like, you don't know how much pain you put me in, and my mom and my brother and sister. So that was a big part. And then actually when I got to my MOS school, one of my cousins got stabbed 9 times. So it was just a testament of like, I'm so glad I left away from home
That could have
because
been
that
you.
could have exactly. So it's something that I still face today, you know,
I
is
hear
like
you.
dealing with that stuff.
So we go through the Marine Corps, you get out. Tell me kind of what happened next once you got out of the Corps.
Good question. So originally I wanted to stay in for 20 and I tore all the cartilage in my right knee. So whittled it down in my last 3 weeks, figured out I needed to figure it out. And I ended up getting into home improvement sales, which was rough because it was straight commission. And one of those times where it was like, I didn't know the lingo and how to talk to civilians, number one. But two, it was just like coming with all this energy, not knowing how to manifest it, not knowing how to speak because we talk to Marines completely different than everybody else. Um, and it was just, you know, working too much. I was working on my bachelor's business management. So best thing I did year 2 in the Marine Corps, started my, or year 3 essentially started my degree. So I was already 2 years done, got out the Marine Corps, trying to figure it out. Me and the wife had a miscarriage before. So we're trying to start a family. Um, End up saying, you know, this home improvement gig is not good for me because it just wasn't aligning with my values. They didn't update their price book. So I lost a lot of deals, didn't make any money one month. I was waiting for my VA package to go through. So not really making anything at that time. So took a leap for myself, got a minimum wage job at a mortgage brokerage, and began to get in conflicts with other people my age because I was 22. But the difference was at 19, 20 years old, I was an ops chief, you know, staff sergeant position. So I'm briefing my commanding officer on why we should fly the flight schedule, what we need to do, why training events need to be happening. I'm coordinating it. I'm talking to all these units around base and, hey, brother, how do you do this? Because my job was building the unit up from the ground up after I got back from Kuwait. So that was one of my big things. So it was, you know, networking, learning how to run a business, but unofficially. And that's where I was like, I want to start a business, but I didn't know. So at that mortgage brokerage, faced adversity. I'm going through school, you know, waking up early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning to go to the gym, taking care of the wife, you know, trying to have a baby, second miscarriage. And it was like, man, you know, why is everything happening? Failed my mortgage exam 3 times. And I'm like, am I stupid? Like, I just can't grasp this and I can't pass this dang test. But everything else in my life, other than a couple classes, you know, those dumb tests at MOS school where they're making me learn about all these aircraft and I only work on one aircraft, you know, it led it into that. So that's where I began kind of researching into podcasting. And then from there, got aligned with a podcaster, Zach Babcock. It's funny is I actually went in his group and I was like, hey, brother, you're an inspiration. And one of his old COO and president messaged me and was like, hey, brother, I'm an Army officer. I got out the Army. I'm here to help you. So it was kind of building that camaraderie. And then it built from there, networked with them, and ultimately ended up starting a business with them because I was working at a job helping other veterans to VA claims and very rewarding, but I'm working 60 to 80 hours. We're trying to I have a daughter now. And it was one of those where I was like, man, I can't do this. And then to top that off, I had a nanny that was coming in $1,400 a month. It would have been 2,800, and that was every other day. So 2,800 for every 5 days a week. And we're like, man, we can't do that because it's going to spread us thin. So I quit my job, you know, talked to my mentor, and he's like, hey, man, let's start a business. So from there, collaborated with him we started Alpha Influence Media, helping other podcasters get on shows, get aligned to their ideal guests, maximizing their influence, dialing in on that content, getting the top rated podcast. So it was one of those for me where it's like, man, I dealt with all this stuff, went to those jobs where I was just like, man, this isn't for me. And then finally was able to get in the right room with the people, talk to other veterans like yourself, where I'm like, you know what? We can do anything. Because growing up, I always heard that belief. And a lot of my uncles would tell me, it's like, oh, you went to the Marine Corps. Like, if you don't stay in, you're not going to do anything with your life. And I'm just like, what? And one of my uncles worked at Home Depot for 30 years. So I'm like, nothing against you, but you work at Home Depot for 30 years. You're telling me that me going to the Marine Corps is a bad decision. Like, you don't understand because you haven't been there. So I was that one that, like I said, questioned everything and then just did my own thing because I was like, I'm going to live my life and be the best I can be.
That's awesome. So for our guests that are not watching us, we're on both YouTube video and then obviously audio on most other podcasts. I'm looking at your logo and it looks like a pretty aggressive gorilla, and then obviously we have the name Alpha Influence Media. You didn't choose some mamby-pamby snowflake based thing. Tell me about the gorilla and tell me why it's called Alpha Influence Media, not just Influence Media.
Good question. So the gorilla originated when I started my podcast, The Winner's Paradigm. I wanted an animal behind it. And when I started researching into the animals, a gorilla stood for gentleness. They're good providers, kind of like us as men and as warriors. And then at the same time, they have that dark side. So it's like they can be the nice, kind, gentle ones, but you don't want to fuck with them. And that was essentially what it was.
Greatest
with the gorilla
friend and the worst enemy.
Exactly. I was like, I'm a loyal servant, but I'm not the one to cross. I have this complex of it, especially the Marine Corps was like squared away. I got to do that. So the gorilla came in. It's like, hey, you're a badass. You can influence other people to do it. And that's my podcast, is challenging it. So that came with that. The Alpha Influence Media was actually funny when I was talking with my business partners and we're coming up with a name for the business. They're like, what do you want to do? I'm like, 6-figure entrepreneur booking services. And then they're like, so what are you going to do when you get a hold of 7-figure? Well, 7-figure entrepreneurs, we're going to do a rebrand. That's not going to work. So our group at the time was called Alpha Podcasters. And they were like, well, we're alphas and we're doing influence. So why don't we just do Alpha Influence? And then they were like, media would be the key. So we did Alpha Influence Media. We put our first gorilla out there that was going to be the symbol. And then it went for AIM as the abbreviated title. So that's where that scope came in. We took it back to the professional team. They put the scope in there and then they put the gorilla in there. So that's where we got the AIM. And then it matched perfectly because Marine Corps, military background, like to shoot. So aligned perfectly with the vision.
It's a great logo, man. I see a lot of them. I love it. I'd love to have a sticker if you ever make decals of that. That would be a good sticker to put on my Yeti or on my car. Hey,
Absolutely, brother.
You mentioned that you got a chance to read Warrior Entrepreneur. Talk to me about how that influenced you and any lessons you learned specifically from that you can apply.
So one of the things I loved about Warrior Entrepreneur, and I'd say because I read the book of the 3 Rings prior to, it was awesome when you're talking about the samurai and the way of the samurai, and that they had this whole component of life where they did gardening and they did, spirituality and they took care of their family. Like there was so many things a samurai did where it wasn't just being a warrior. And I felt like that was symbolic to life because us, definitely in the service, there's so much factors that roll into that. And if you don't, check all those boxes, if you don't, do what you got to do, then what's going to happen is it's going to seep other ways. So I really love your book because I nerd out on that stuff about warriors and the Romans. And I researched that at younger. So it was kind of like being able to have that resonate with that message. And then was also able to live that and was like, man, this is how I'm living my life. Like I got into meditation. I never thought that would be something that I would be interested in. And then it started allowing me to pray and to see religion differently because it was no longer like looking at the judgmental side. I was like, man, it's a way of life. It's the way we treat people. It's the way we take care of our brothers and sisters. So that was one way for me was like, as a warrior, there's so many components than just being the dynamic warrior and fighting. And that's symbolic again, to the Marine Corps, McMap, they would say that, what's warrior ethos? And you guys would go through the motions, or in my case, like got to be a black belt. And it was, doing all these things, putting all these hours in, and there was so many components to doing that and fighting when you're tired and like building that strength up. So your book was perfect because it allowed us to say, what the elder generation of warriors are, and then how we can be modern warriors in our business and life. And and then also, some of the trailblazers that are out there right now. So that was pretty damn awesome to learn about as well, brother.
Well, brother, I got to tell you, you inspire me. You are a fellow warrior entrepreneur. I can't wait to see what's next from you. And as you continue your warrior's path of just busting through every barrier that comes your way, you're a Marine, and I know nothing's going to stand in the way of you accomplishing your mission for you and your family and just really for society in general. We're better off with you in it and helping us out. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Yes, so it's going to be the winnersparadigm.com, and then social media will be Alpha Influence Media. So you guys can follow me there, and then I can also put the link up there, to book a call so we can help you guys out if you were interested in being able to get aligned to the ideal people you need to be around to make that maximum impact for your podcast and streamline that service.
Excellent. Well, we like to conclude every Warriors podcast with a dedication to a warrior that went before us. Is there anybody in particular you'd like to dedicate the show to?
Yes, I dedicated to one of my friends, James. We grew up together. We played football. We wrestled together in high school. We got pretty close. He passed away on Sunday from a drive-by shooting. And it was, something crazy. I don't know the details of it, but that hurt because it was like, man, I moved away from home because those things can happen. And that's one of my people. Part of the journey is I lost a lot of friends along the way. That's a total of 4 now. So it's one of those where it's like, I really appreciate life, and I appreciate, the journey of it, because it's something we take for granted sometimes. And I know definitely with our Marines, I've dealt with so many situations like that where it's like morale was one, taking care of them, mental health. So I'm huge in that.
Well, I'm sure he'd be proud to know that you're carrying on the legacy of your friendship together, and I'm sure he's out there in some of those dark moments helping you to encourage you and use that grit and dig down and kind of get through what you need to get through. So glad to do that. So we finish every podcast the same way. We give everybody a knife hand and say Semper Fidelis. So I'll go ahead and count you down, see if we can do it at the same time. 3, 2, 1, Semper Fidelis.
Semper Fidelis.
All right, brother. Great job.